الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. First, I'd like to congratulate all of you on the birth of the Holy Prophet and our sixth Holy Imam. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes their lives an inspiration for our lives. Last week we were talking about the concept of isma, and we raised some important questions. The first question that we raised was, how can infallibility be an achievement for the prophets and the imams if they are not capable of committing sins? And the answer that we gave to that question was to say that no, in fact they are capable of committing sins. However, they do not commit sins because they don't have the desire to commit a sin, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with a special knowledge, a special experience, and a special light. Now, even though this question or this answer, it gave us an answer to one question, it raised a second question for us. And the second question was this, that just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them this blessing, if He would have given the same blessing to me as well, then even I would not have committed a sin. And that's an important question for us to answer. Now, the first thing that I do want to point out is this is not a new question. In fact, we know that this question is at least 12 centuries old. And one of our scholars, Shaykh al-Mufid, the one who compiled Kitab al-Irshad, has given us an answer to this question, and that's the answer that I want to share with you today. Shaykh al-Mufid, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who is going to make use of a blessing and who is not going to make use of a blessing. It's not the case that every time God blesses a human being, that person will make use of that blessing. Example that I have given earlier is the example of a scholarship. Sometimes you give a scholarship to a young man and he makes use of it. He goes to university and he starts off his career. Sometimes you give a scholarship to a person and they hold on to it and they don't make use of it. So what do? We try to give a scholarship to that person whom we know is going to make use of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed some people with this knowledge of isma because He knows that they will make use of it, and He has not given it to others because He knows that they will not make use of it. For example, our scholars point out, don't think if God would have given this knowledge of isma to Zulaykha that she may not have committed a sin. She may still have wanted to commit a sin. So this raises a very important answer for us. It tells us that isma is two things. On one hand, it is a blessing from God, a special knowledge from God. On the other hand, it also requires a potential in the recipient as well. And God knows which recipient has the potential and chooses them to be a prophet, and which recipient does not have the potential and does not burden them with that responsibility.
So they have to deserve it.
No, they have to have the potential for it.
Not deserving?
No. Nobody is deserving. Everything that comes from God is a gift of God. But they have to have the potential for it. Okay? Now, this was a very theological or theoretical question. I want to come now to a more ethical and a more practical question. Whenever I talk about infallibility, sometimes I get this question asked of me, and I know some teachers have also been asked this question as well. The question goes this way. It says that now that we are fallible, and God knows that we are going to be committing mistakes, why don't you allow us to commit some mistakes, and then we will realize our mistake and we'll come back to the right path. Especially when we talk about the mercy of God, and I talk about how great the mercy of God is, a young man will sometimes come up to me and say, well then allow me to commit some mistakes and commit some sins, and then after I have gone down the wrong path, I'll come back to the right path and I'll seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why can't I go and try a little bit of alcohol, do some drugs, or go out and hang out in that whole party scene, Friday nights, go to clubs, take off my hijab, so on and so forth. After that, inshallah, when God is merciful, God knows I'm fallible, God knows I'm going to be committing sins, God will forgive me as well. How do you answer that question? So I was reading up some ahadith on forgiveness. And the ahadith talk about how forgiving God is and how easy it is to seek forgiveness from God. And I came across a very interesting hadith from our first Imam. He says, do you know what is easier than seeking forgiveness? Does anybody know what's easier than seeking forgiveness?
Not doing no sin.
Exactly. Not committing the sin in the first place. And there's a philosophy that goes with it as well. It says to us that don't think that a sin leaves you unchanged. We disassociate ourselves from the sin and we say, it's just a sin, it has no impact upon me. They say, think of a sin as a virus that you introduce into a system, you know. You can't say that I'm going to introduce a virus into the computer and let's see how it pans out. Because the moment you do that, it stays there. And when it stays there, it starts taking over other systems as well. And there comes a point when it takes control of the entire system, and then even if you want to eliminate the virus, you have no tools left in your hands to eliminate the virus. Why? Because you have reached the point of no return. They say a sin is also in the same way. A sin gnaws at your heart and your soul. And as long as you keep repeating it, or you keep leaving it over there, it starts to take control of you. There may come a point in a person's life when they no longer want to seek forgiveness. Seeking forgiveness is no longer a value for them. Why? Because that is the effect of the sin, right? Returning back to God, praying to God, having faith in God, loving God, becomes no longer a value for them. And therefore the first Imam says that easier than repenting for a sin is to stay away from committing the sin. Now, I also want to use this opportunity to introduce some books to you that we find in the library. As we celebrate the birth of the Holy Prophet, sometimes we get asked that are there any resources that talk about the early days in the life of the Holy Prophet, the circumstances and the environment in Arabia, his childhood and when he was growing up. I want to introduce this book to you called The Message, and it's written by one of our Maraji of Taqleed, Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani. The translation itself is a very good translation. This book not only gives you a lot of detail about the early days of the Holy Prophet, the situation in Arabia, you know, the things the Prophet used to do as he was growing up, but because Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani is also a theologian, he also in this book tackles some of the objections that come up during the lifetime of the Holy Prophet. For example, I remember somebody was asking me once, Lady Khadija, the wife of the Holy Prophet, before the advent of Islam, was she a Muslim, a believer in one God, or was she a mushrika, right? This book answers that question. Or for example, certain other objections about the revelation of the Quran, or some of the myths about the revelations of the Quran, they have been discussed in this book, and they have also been answered in this book. The Message by Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani, available in your library. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.